Okay, in this video, we're going to be reviewing the week 3 initial post prompt. And in this week, you are starting your process for developing a program or funding proposal for an organization. Now, you can use the organization that you selected in week 1, but students often also decide to shift and change, and so you can choose a different organization if you prefer. So there's going to be pieces of the proposal due each week for week 3, 4, and 5. And so it's incredibly important to uh, stay on time with these assignments, and I'll support you in the best way that I can because each week you will be responding, providing feedback to your peers, making edits, and then submitting the following week the final kind of piece of that proposal. And by week 6, you will have a final proposal, which is really exciting. So we're going to take this piece by piece. If you take a look at chapter 15 of the Brody and Nair book and chapter 8 of Kettner, those are some essential readings for this week. And you'll be focusing on 3 parts of this initial proposal: the statement of need, goals and objectives, and then developing a logic model. And then when you provide a response to your partners for week 3, you're going to be assessing, the clarity of their proposal, the unmet needs that they've identified that they want to identify funding for, and then how they are planning on measuring their success with the goals and objectives that they've chosen. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So let's say that your project is to focus on housing, and maybe it's a local housing authority, and perhaps the unmet need that you've identified is that the housing authority does not have a crisis or a crisis response team. Let's go with that. And so in the introduction and the summary of need, the proposed solution, you'll want to start to identify, why is that unmet need important? If that need were met, who would be served, and what would you be able to do? So, for example, perhaps there's always issues on housing sites, and a crisis response team could help residents manage complex situations, de-escalate conflict, and perhaps they also serve as case managers. So a liaison between property managers and what they need in the apartment. Um, the next section that you'll want to focus on is empirical evidence. So identifying perhaps in the community that you're focusing on how many housing authority units there are, how many people are currently benefiting from the housing authority or rental assistance, and providing evidence to contextualize why the issue and that unmet need are important. You'll want to cite sources here. And of course, you can refer back, if you're using the organization that you picked in week 1, you can refer back to some of that empirical evidence that you found already. The next section would be organizational context. So here you might want to provide some history of the housing authority, the mission of that organization, how they set income limits, and really, again, contextualizing the organization and how they serve individuals. This is incredibly important because as you identify a new component for funding, you will need to make sure that it's integrated into the existing organization. And so that's part of the reason. If you're, again, focusing on housing, preventing evictions is an incredibly important component. So you might have some evidence on the rate and frequency of evictions and how your new crisis response program may help prevent evictions if that is the goal. So you start to think about those goals and objectives as well. In the template that we've provided you, there is, once you start to think through those, there's a box which is for your statement of need. That is meant to be, consider it like your elevator pitch. So as you've developed your introduction, your empirical evidence, your organizational context, in the statement of need, you want to concisely, in 4 to 6 sentences, craft your statement of need. And that's something that if you were to be in the elevator with a funder and you had 30 seconds to pitch, how would you craft both the problem, the need, the evidence, and then what you're asking for? Section 2 is goals and objectives. So this is where I generally will provide the most feedback to students. You want to make sure that your goals and objectives are measurable and that they have a time component. So for example, let's say one of your objectives is to reduce any lease violations um, across the housing authority complex. That's that's a good objective to start, but what you'll want to do is be very specific that you might want to reduce lease violations by 25% in the first year of your program, or 10%. Essentially, you're making this up, or you're developing educated guesses of what your objectives would be, and that's okay for this assignment. But you definitely want to have that time component. By when will you achieve this objective, and the specificity of um, an increase or a decrease. So maybe you want to increase um, the number of submitted complaints, because then you know that residents are utilizing the service. If you don't have a baseline, then you might have a goal of having at least 100 residents utilize the response team within the first 6 months. So very specific goals. And you'll want to do that for each objective and goal that you identify. And then you will start to put this information, this is the last section, into a logic model. The logic model allows you to plan your program. It has 4 parts to it: inputs, activities, outputs, and objectives or outcomes. The inputs are things that you need to make the program occur. So computers, property managers, the crisis conflict team, you may hire people, so human resources. Perhaps you need training manuals. So that is the kinds of things. Think about, things that you need to help that program move forward. The activities then are what that crisis conflict team would be doing. So perhaps they're going to be managing referrals to property manage or conflict resolution. The activity should be also measurable. So perhaps there's going to be 2 or 3 crisis response sessions, open office hours set up each week. That actually seems a little bit low, but perhaps there's open office hours every day. But you want to be specific about how much and what's going on with those activities. If there's referrals being made, then the referrals, perhaps there's a goal when you get to the objectives column. There's a goal to make 25 referrals for clients per week, for example. And then the outputs are what the residents and the program would be creating. So perhaps, one thing is that residents would have a better understanding going into the meeting what their options are for resolution. And then the objective would be that you would have, an increase of 25% in resolutions of conflicts every 3 months or every month. And so that's the way you want to think about your logic model. Is the specificity is going to help you look back and measure. So this takes practice. This is going to be a draft that you're submitting in week 3, and I will give you feedback, and you will get feedback from your partners. So let me know if you have questions about how to write a measurable objective. They're called SMART objectives. If you Google that, you will read a bit about that in the reading material for this week as well. All right, I think that covers it for the program proposal part 1. Good luck on this, and please reach out to me if you have questions.